Welcome to History 111, Lecture 18, Post-War Economic Issues. One of the issues that the War of 1812 exposed was national banking, and to understand that, we're going to have to go back to the beginning. The first national bank was proposed in 1791 and established by the Secretary of the Treasury at the time, Alexander Hamilton. And one of the functions of the national bank was to mint U.S. currency, but also had other goals, like establishing financial order, establishing credit both in country and overseas, and resolving the issue of fiat currency issued by the Continental Congress. And what that concerns is money comes in three types: metal, which is gold and silver; representative, which is paper, other currency that can be redeemed for money; and fiat money, which has no intrinsic value and can't be converted to metal, and is really only useful for its ability to purchase goods and services. Now, during the Revolution, the country had minted a lot of that type of money, and they needed to pull it out of circulation and redeem it and build up the nation's credit. And for the 20 years the national bank existed and really worked on those goals. But the charter expired in 1811, 1 year before the war. So one of the major tools the country had for establishing financial order and helping to regulate and sponsor the economy simply goes away right before this war. So in the absence of a national bank, the country fought the war in 1812 relying on what are called state banks. And state banks do a similar function, but only within each given state. And the state banks had issued representative currency beyond their ability to redeem on demand. What that means is they were printing money that was worth so much gold, and they were printing more money than gold. So when people started turning up and asking to change it back to the metal, they couldn't do this. And this caused a crisis of confidence, and it caused a lot of chaos, and there was a lot of different forms of paper money with different values in circulation. It made business very difficult and very crazy. So after the war, people start thinking we really need a national bank back. And 1816 comes along, and they go ahead and recharter this. Now, the second national bank doesn't shut down the state banks, but it does bring a big enough force into the market to require those banks to operate sensibly, or risk simply being forced out of the market by economics. Another significant issue in the post-war period was the Panic of 1819, and what had happened there was the Napoleonic Wars had created a very high demand in Europe for agricultural goods, and that fueled a lot of land expansion, and that was one of the reasons that state banks had really gone crazy, was they were extending a lot of credit to speculators. Now, that works very well when the prices were high in Europe, but when the wars end and prices go back to normal in Europe, well, that causes a lot of these farmers and speculators to fail, and that leads to a chain reaction with widespread bank failures, and a national bank starts tightening credit and foreclosing on bad loans. And all of this comes down to 6 years of depression where the economy is in basically ruins. And that makes how national banking is going to work and what's going to happen into a really pressing issue. In addition, the U.S. textile industry had boomed with the war, but with peace came a return of British competition. And what happens is the British start to engage in what's called dumping, and that's where you're going to sell large amounts of cargo way below cost in an attempt to cripple U.S. industries. The idea being, if you sell so much so fast and you drive those companies out of business, once they're out of business, then you can raise your prices back up and make a ton of money because there's no competition. And that was something that was going to really hurt the U.S. economy. So the United States passed protective tariffs and so on and so forth. The war had also shown need for major transportation improvements to the national transport network, and people start working on that, and Congress goes and passes bills to help build up a better economic infrastructure for the country. But Madison, the president at the time, vetoes this, saying that he believed it was beyond the government's authority without a constitutional amendment. And given that Madison is really kind of the driving force of the Constitution, he didn't know what he was talking about when it came to what the Constitution said. But as a consequence of his decision and his strict reading of it, this area of vital national need is left to state governments and private enterprise, and doesn't become a federal issue, really, until the 20th century. So what's the big idea here? Well, first and foremost, banking and economic development are key issues for the country. But what we really need to understand is there's no unified vision of the proper role of the federal government in this. And as a result, while you do get things like a national bank, you also get the veto of legislation that would have helped address some of these things. So as a result, the federal government approaches this in somewhat of a haphazard fashion at this time period. See you in the next lecture.